Can you do a short introduction about yourself?
About myself?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm a professor of theoretical physics of Uppsala University. I'm doing research on black holes, cosmology, and lots of very fundamental things like that. And since a number of years, I'm a member of the Nobel Committee for Physics, and since a couple of years back, I'm the secretary of the committee, which means that I have some further responsibilities.
Okay, right. Can you do a summary about this year's Nobel Prize?
Yeah, so the prize is about really studying matter at extremely short time scales. One talks about attoseconds, and one can say that there are as many heartbeats within the age of the universe as there are attoseconds within a heartbeat. So that's sort of the relation. So in some sense, we are in the middle of these extreme time scales. On the one hand, the age of the universe, on the other hand, an attosecond, and we are sort of in the middle. And in order to be able to study phenomena at such short time scales, then you need to have a way to take pictures, in a sense, with a very short exposure or a very brief flash of light in order to capture whatever is moving around at this very rapid pace inside of matter. And that is what this is about. In order you are constructing a way to produce, using lasers, these very rapid, brief pulses of light. And what you can use them for is to study how electrons move inside of the atoms. Previously, one has been able to follow how atoms move within molecules and how molecules are moving around. But now with this tool, you can actually examine how the electrons inside of an atom, how they jump between different levels inside of the atom. And in that way, you can study physics that have been very difficult to study before.
Okay. One question I have is because for the electron, we have an energy gap. And we use a certain energy to knock out those electrons.
Yes.
But why the time is also important? Why the time pulse is also important?
Well, the interesting thing, it's just as you say. I mean, for instance, there is a very precise, concrete experiment that they have been doing. And they were looking at a certain atom, and then they were looking at how you can excite the electrons in this atom. I think it was a neon, for instance. And then you can see that in some cases there are two electrons which are excited. And it turns out that there is a time lag between these two electrons. And one can sort of follow that now this is jumping up and then this is jumping up. So it's these kind of phenomena that you can study. I mean, time resolve the motion and the interplay between the electrons in an atom which you disturb in some sense. Now it turns out that this motion of the electrons is also sensitive very much to the environment that this atom is in, which means that you in this way can detect and measure very subtle effects, subtle changes even in the properties which depend on where these atoms are actually sitting. So this means that it's a very interesting tool to study very precise and integrate properties of various kinds of matter. So that's interesting from a fundamental research point of view, but it's also interesting as a kind of a tool which you can use also perhaps in the future if you want to design new kinds of materials within electronics, solar cells, whatever, then this might be a tool which will be very useful for you. It could also possibly have applications also within medicine if you want to study various forms of tissue or whatever in a very careful way. But all of these applications, they are sort of in the future. This prize is for the experimental development, really, of this very powerful tool.
I see. So to generate such a short pulse, we use the interference between the photons.
Absolutely right. And the very first step in producing these pulses, that was a step taken by Anne Laureates in the end of the 80s. And she discovered, and that was really a surprise, a phenomena where you use the laser and you could, from the matter that you sort of directed the laser towards, there came out a broad spectrum of light. with roughly the same intensity but very many different wavelengths. That is sort of the first step. And then by combining these light waves in the appropriate way, then you can indeed create these short pulses of light through interference. And that was something that Agustin and Krauss, independent of each other, managed to do like 20 years ago, basically, for the first time.
Right. Seems the interference is pretty like a basic, simple for the physics.
Yeah.
But what's the difficulty when generating such short pulse?
Well, I mean, there are many things that need to work out. First of all, in order to create this, you call it sort of a plateau of, it's really overtones in a sense, just like if you are if you're listening to the sound from a tone from a guitar and the string is vibrating, then there is a tone which you hear, but there are also other tones which correspond to the string vibrating in other frequencies. And what you need to do then with the laser is kind of to initiate many such waves of light with different frequencies. And that is, of course, something which is difficult in itself, and it was a discovery, really, that was possible to do in an efficient way. But then all of these waves, they have to be combined in the right way so that you actually achieve the interference too. So there are many things that need to be worked out in order to create something which you can actually use for anything.
Do you think it's possible to create an even shorter pulse?
That's a good question. How short a pulse that you can actually create? We'll see. One could say that there was a fundamental limit to the shortness of the pulse if you go back like 20, 30 years, and that was that the shortness of the pulse was limited to the wavelength of the light that you could use. Here you are really circumventing that by using this spectrum of waves which you combine in this way. So from a theoretical point of view, there is no longer such a limitation. So we'll see what one can achieve in the future.
Did you talk to the laureate this morning? Did you have a phone call with them?
Very briefly, we called them up just before the announcement.
Okay, how did they react?
They were, the ones that we could reach, that was Laureates and Ferenc Krauss, and they must say they were really overwhelmed. I think that's the correct word to describe it. And Laureates, she was actually, we couldn't reach her at first, and that was since she was actually lecturing for some students. But then we managed to reach her in the break and tell her the news. And she was very important for her that she could actually continue with the lecture. So I don't know how she managed, actually.